sometimes we have to work with simplifying square roots that don't have perfect squares. Now, you guys have worked ones like this before. When you learned them earlier in this chapter, I gave you perfect squares, so it was something like this. Okay, remember when we worked with that, I told you that it might be easier for you to look at it as a square root of 9 over a square root of 25. And then you could go through and simplify. Okay, the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 25 is 5, and this would be my final answer. So we're going to still use that same concept, but then sometimes they're going to be leaving that square root as a non-perfect square. So we're going to have to check to see, does it break down any further? And if not, then we're just going to leave it as that square root within our fraction. Okay, so here we have simplified the square root of 11/16. So we're going to think of it like this. We're going to think of it as the square root of 11 over the square root of 16. Now, within that, can we break it down? 11 is not a perfect square, but 16 is. The square root of 16 is 4, so that's how we got the 4 there. Square root of 11 cannot be broken down. 11 is a prime number, so that's the lowest that it will actually go. So this is just going to be our final answer. Okay, we're going to start out pretty basic with this. Eventually, what they'll start doing is later on down the road, you'll start working with some fractions involving those square roots and so forth, and simplifying within that. Okay. So we've got the square root of 13/4. So think of it like this, the square root of 13 over the square root of 4. And some of you are going to be able to look at that and just do it. And some of you are going to have to do like I do in red, where you break it down into 2 pieces. So the square root of 13, well, 13 is a prime number that cannot be broken down any further. Okay, so 13 is just going to stay on the top. Square root of 4, is that a perfect square? Yes, it is. Square root of 4 is 2. This is my final answer, the square root of 13 over 2. Okay, so now we've got the square root of 35, 36. So some of you need to see it like this. Okay, so now if I go through 35 breaks down to 7 times 5. So that can't be broken down any further. So that's going to have to stay, square root of 35. If you check it on your calculator and it gives you, and it gives you a decimal number, then you have to leave it. Doesn't mean that we might not be able to break down, whoa, my goodness, that we won't be able to break down some of those square roots. But for right now, they're not going to have us go to that level yet. Okay, 36 is 6 times 6, okay, or 2 times 3 times 2 times 3. So it's the square root of 6 is actually 6. This is my final answer. I'm not going to go any further. Okay, you can use your calculator to help you, like if you're not remembering. I'm hoping you're remembering those perfect squares because they're your basic computation mathematical facts. Okay, so here we have the square root of 5 over b squared. Ooh, they're throwing in a b there. So let's remember that anytime we have a square root, the opposite of it is something squared. So those two will cancel each other out. Okay, this and this are going to cancel each other out. So I am left on the bottom with just a b. On the top, the square root of 5 cannot be broken down any further. So I'm going to leave it as the square root of 5. Final answer. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's say I threw in a number, like let's say I put 7 where b was, just so that you're understanding my little cross-offs here. If I had put 7 here where b is, 7 squared is 49. What they would have had was 5 over 49. Is 49 a perfect square? Yes, it's 7. Okay, ultimately what happened is this squared was canceled out by that square root. So that's what left us with just the b. Okay, so I want you guys to try these two. So go ahead and pause your video, work your way through these two, finding the square root. Remember, most of you are probably going to have to see it in this format. so that it's not overwhelming and thinking of it as this big fraction. Think of it as two pieces, one on top of the other. So go ahead, pause your video, work your way through this one, and then start your video back up to check your answer. Okay, so your final answers here were the square root of 7 over 25 and the square root of 67 over 10. Okay, so that's it working with fractions. I know sometimes they throw that fraction part in there and they make it look so confusing and you feel overwhelmed. But remember, I try and break it down for you to make it based on what you've previously learned, okay?